We all make mistakes. I think you wouldn't be human if you didn't make mistakes. Of course, the one mistake, and in my memoirs, which I've just handed in to a sister company to HarperCollins, which will come out in August, I talk about this, which is my exiting cabinet as chairman of the party. I wasn't explicit enough in detailing in my ministerial declaration my settlement with HMRC a couple of years ago, and that was probably one of the major mistakes. I'm sure I've made many others as well.
Now, this week, as well as the defection, we had the news of another prominent MP seeking to stand down at the general election. Nadhim Zahawi will be heading to pastures new after being the Conservative MP for Stratford-on-Avon since 2010 and holding a whole host of ministerial jobs under Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. And he joins us now on the programme. Good morning, Nadhim Zahawi.
Good morning.
Just tell us, what was the moment you changed your mind and decided to stand down?
Well, I've been, in many ways, like many of my colleagues, agonising about a decision because I sort of see my life in sort of decade chunks. I did a decade at YouGov. I've done over a decade, almost a decade and a half in Parliament on the front line of politics. And I felt that now was the right time for me to step aside for someone who has the energy, the drive to hold what I think is the best seat in Parliament, to be the Member of Parliament for William Shakespeare. And I thought it was only right because we were coming towards our annual general meeting in my constituency this Friday, and I thought it was only right to let my team know my intentions. I didn't want to do it before the local elections because I didn't, again, want a story about me personally to overshadow the local election campaign, and I chose to do it last Thursday. That was sort of the thought process as such.
Yeah, it was quite a long letter that you wrote. In it, you mentioned mistakes. You said all my mistakes are my own. Were you thinking of one specific mistake when you wrote that line?
We all make mistakes. I think you wouldn't be human if you didn't make mistakes. Of course, the one mistake, and in my memoirs, which I've just handed in to a sister company to HarperCollins, which will come out in August, I talk about this, which is my exiting cabinet as chairman of the party. I wasn't explicit enough in detailing in my ministerial declaration my settlement with HMRC a couple of years ago, and that was probably one of the major mistakes. I'm sure I've made many others as well.
Was that, I mean, do you wish you had been clearer about what happened with HMRC? What was the reason that you weren't at the time?
Yeah, of course, and hindsight is a wonderful thing. And again, I sort of sat and reflected on this as I was writing my memoirs. And when politics is coming at you fast and hard, and you're in the middle of running big departments, of course, when I was doing the vaccine program and then education and then Chancellor of the Exchequer, although I was very clear that there were inquiries from HMRC, I wasn't as explicit on the settlement, and then of course the settlement and the fine, although HMRC did find that it was a careless mistake. That's the category they had, which is a non-deliberate rather than a deliberate mistake. But nevertheless, it carried a fine for the misdemeanor as well. And I think I could have been much more explicit on my ministerial declaration about that, and that's my mistake. And I own that mistake.
Yeah. I want to ask you as well about your feeling on the party's direction of travel. I mean, we've just been talking there with Andrew Mitchell about Natalie Ali's defection. I mean, he essentially called her a traitor and said that she would never be trusted again by her former colleagues on the Conservative benches. Do you think the party should be a bit worried about these defections? First Anne Poulter, now Natalie Ali, now talk of potentially 3 more. Is that something the Tories should be worried about?
I think it's up to, obviously, the Chief Whip and the Whip's office to make sure that all the colleagues, all parliamentarians, are being listened to carefully. That's important. I do think in the case of Natalie Ali, Keir Starmer's made a mistake that Tony Blair wouldn't make. I think it's going to cause some real problems. And if Robert Buckland's quotes today that I read in the Sunday Times are true, then I suspect at some point next week, Keir Starmer's going to come under pressure to refer her to investigation. because it's her word versus Robert Buckland, KC, and of course, I think it's important that these things are looked at properly. I'm sure Labour would have asked for the same thing if the shoe was on the other foot, effectively. But I do think Keir has made a mistake with Natalie Elphicke on this, and I think he'll come to regret it.
Do you think the Prime Minister's doing a good enough job to keep your MPs all pointing in the same direction, though? I mean, you're obviously about to stand down from Parliament. You have a perspective on this maybe that others don't have. You've been around since 2010. It feels at the moment like lots of Tory MPs are looking for some leadership and they don't feel that they're necessarily getting it. Is he doing a good enough job?
I think he is, and I think the one thing that I've learnt about Rishi is he absolutely focuses on the evidence and then acts on them, but takes a long-term view rather than sort of short-term trying to grab a headline type of politician. If you look at what he's done on the economy when he took office,
is that working though? Sorry to interrupt you. Is that working? Well, because it feels like it maybe
absolutely
isn't.
No, well, if you believe the ONS, the economy is going gangbusters now, and inflation is just over 3% and coming down even further, which will see interest rates begin to drop, I hope, this year. And of course, you look at what we've done for small business. My background is business, as you know. The business rate relief that Rishi actually introduced during the pandemic, almost 75% discount for retailers, bars, cafes, is still in place in England. The same money's gone to Scotland and Wales, but actually business rates have gone up. Those SMEs are the backbone of the economy. Millions of them can recognise that. You've seen this, the national insurance drop, £900 for people, as well as, of course, £900 for pensioners. All these things will begin, I think, to make a difference. Plus education, the department that I'm closest to. It's no accident that children in England now are amongst the best readers in the world. We're climbing up the league tables around the world, whereas in Scotland and Wales, it's going the other way. Why? Because of conservative policy on phonics, on the academisation process, the multi-academy trust, all of that. I think when people begin to focus on a general election, they'll begin to see the difference. I do think Starmer's made an error of judgment in actually opposing the Rwanda bill and now coming out saying he would scrap it. I think my prediction to you is before the general election, he'll reverse that policy.
Is the election still winnable for the Tories then? Is the election still winnable for the Tories?
Absolutely. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because I think in many ways, Rishi Sunak is underestimated.
We're getting listeners' reaction to the interview. One of them says, Zahawi will always be connected with possibly the worst set of administrations in memory, but he's always seemed like a decent bloke and manages not to lie quite as much as the majority of them. Seems a loss, but time for new blood. Would you accept that as a suitable political epitaph?
Well, I would accept it, other than I think most of my colleagues on the Labour benches, on the Lib Dem benches, SNP, across the board, Green, go into politics for all the right reasons, and they stand before you and give interviews because they believe in what they're saying. We all come into politics to want to improve the lot of our country, to improve the lot of the people that we represent. In my case, the Stratford-on-Avon residents. I think it is, in many ways, worries me and breaks my heart that people think that the majority of politicians in Parliament, there are always obviously the bad eggs, and we've been talking about Natalie Elphicke earlier, but on the whole, my experience, on the Labour benches, I've got some great friends. Look at John Healey, a great parliamentarian, now Shadow Defence Secretary, a fantastic human being. We bonded together because we did a US trip together where we shadowed congressmen and women a long time ago now, about 12 years ago.
I mean, he was the one who sponsored Natalie Elphicke actually joining Labour.
But look, as I said, we all make mistakes. I think John has made a mistake on that one. That doesn't make him a bad human being.
Can I ask you, you've just called Natalie Elphicke a bad egg. Is she a bad egg because she defected, or is she a bad egg because of some of the things that she's done and that you are now saying need to be potentially referred? Because if it's the latter, why was she still a member of the Tory party?
Well, look, for both reasons. I don't think, I like people who defect, when she's been ultra right-wing, criticising everything Labour stands for. to suddenly have this sort of conversion makes no sense to me, and I doubt whether it's sincere. If what Robert Buckland says today is true, then it should be investigated, and that really is very bad behaviour of a parliamentarian.
I want to ask you one final question before we let you go, and it's something that you wrote in your very long letter, your leaving letter that you posted on Twitter, on X. You wrote about how you stand and look at yourself in the mirror each morning when you're shaving your head. What made you include that detail?
Because that's what I do every morning. I go like this, and I pinch myself to think, how did a boy from Baghdad, 11 years old, arrive on these shores and end up as the second Lord of the Treasury? It is an extraordinary country, and I'm going to start blubbing in a minute, but I can just about hold it together now. But this is the greatest country on earth, which is why I'd encourage any listener, any viewer, if they're thinking about a political career, don't hesitate. Get involved for whichever team, whether it's the blue team, the red team, the yellow team, green team, whichever team, get involved. The country needs good people, good talent to come forward and become parliamentarians.
Nadhim Zahawi, thank you so much for joining us on the programme this morning.